One of the biggest threats to absolute trust in God, especially when we look at the situation of the world today, is the threat to depend and to trust in our intellect and in our fellow human beings more than God. And we often hear statements like, who you know is better than who you are. And then sometimes people can make very callous statements like, this is my boy, is better than the certificate that you have, or it is better than the number of years you pray. And all of this, when we look at them, tend to send a wrong message to the average Christian and the average human to think that they do not need to trust in God for their survival, for their means of livelihood, for their lives, and for everything that happens around them. Jeremiah the prophet today wants us to be careful about such maxims or such adages because they do not help, rather they destroy us. The tendency to believe in ourselves rather than God, the tendency to believe in ideologies and theories rather than in the Creator who gave us the intellect to even think of such, the tendency to trust in men. The psalmist will tell us in Psalm 20 verse 7 that they would continue to stumble and fall, those who trust in horses or chariots, while they that trust in the Lord will continue to stand firm. This is exactly what the prophet Jeremiah says in chapter 17, that indeed the man who trusts in the Lord is like a tree planted by the riverside. So even in drought, even in dry season, even in the most terrible of situations, whether there is injustice, whether there is pain, whether there is tears, he will continue to blossom because his root is in God. Whereas the one who places his trust in his wealth, the one who places his trust in his intellect, the one who places his trust in people, would continue to experience these droughts even amidst their many. That is why the rich man in our gospel reading met that man Lazarus, yet was so consumed in the false security that what he has gave to him. And then he thought that he didn't need to help Lazarus. He was living his best life based on what the word gave to him, based on what the word would say to him. And this is the same situation with so many, that it's so sad that living in our world today, there are so many who do not even think that some persons are suffering, who do not think that there are injustices, because they were born into the injustice, because their very means of livelihood is the injustice happening around. And so they do not see the need to fight against the injustice. They do not see the need to come out of such situations because their lives, their entirety, their totality depends on this. This is true of some of our leaders. This is true of some families. This is true of some individuals who think that without this corruption, without this false lifestyles, they cannot survive. That is trusting in themselves. That is trusting in what they have. And Jesus would say to us, looking at this parable, do not be indifferent to others, do not be indifferent to that Lazarus around us. There are so many Lazaruses amongst us. There are so many Lazaruses lying down at our gates. There are so many Lazaruses in our lives. There are those who ignore the very Lazarus in their house while reaching out to others outside for help. There are those who ignore that Lazarus in a brother who is in desperate need of help. That Lazarus in a sister who is in desperate need of attention. That Lazarus in a mother or in a father who is in desperate need of help for their children. So Jesus tells us today to look around us and we would find that Lazarus always around us. We would find that Lazarus in our churches, we would find them in our schools, in our places of work, in our surrounding. And we should not forget also that God searches the hearts, as Jeremiah the prophet tells us. And so he who searches the heart knows what to give to each man in accordance with his works. So therefore, it is not about the external things we do. It is about what our heart says about the external things we do. So we may be giving out, reaching out to others with the goal of making a name for ourselves, with the goal of making these persons look less of themselves, with the goal of impoverishing or with the goal of weaponizing their state of life. Jesus tells us that is not charity. When we give with the goal of weaponizing the poverty of these persons, not giving them in a state or in a way that would help them to grow, like the eighth principle of Maimonides says, that giving in such a way that the person is empowered to be able to sustain or survive on their own, then that is no longer giving. So we pray that God will help us to understand this and to look out for that man called Lazarus around us, that brother, that sister, that situation called Lazarus around us, and to see how to better make them good, to help them, and to not be